Goths have a very complicated relationship with the word phase. And the reason that it's such a complicated relationship is generally by the way that it's presented to us. And when it's presented to us, it's usually presented to us in a very mocking or condescending way, even if it's unintentional, because we'll be approached by people who will see us and say, oh, I went through a goth phase, but I got over that, or I grew out of that, as if to imply that it's something that one can either get over, like a virus, or it's something that you grow out of because it's something juvenile or immature. So either way, it's insulting to us, especially when it's something that we're so passionate about. It's, oh, well, gee, thank you. So as you can imagine, having such a complicated relationship with the word phase, it is something that we also kind of struggle with when we find our way back to goth. Because a lot of us, and I'm finding this more and more, which I find both comforting, but I also find very sad, because it's comforting to me to know that I'm not the only person that's ever gone through this, but it's also sad because the majority of times that a person has gone through this, it's not for good reasons. And it's usually connected to some sort of pain or trauma or just some sort of negative experience that we just kind of don't want to remember. And the reason that we don't want to remember is because it was bad enough that it made us forget who we are. And there was a period in my life where I spent about 4, maybe 5 years where I wasn't goth. I had been a goth since I was 15 years old. I've been involved in the subculture that long. The music has been such a huge part of my life, a subculture, massive part of my life. It is, I can categorically state that when I was a troubled teen, and I wasn't troubled by way of being, say, for example, what's the word I'm looking for? I wasn't a bad kid. I wasn't a kid that got into a lot of trouble, but I didn't have the most stable home life. So not having the most stable home life, you kind of find your family and you find your home outside of your home in other things. And for some kids, unfortunately, they find that in things that are negative or things that are harmful to them. Or you find, say, for example, what I did, and I found music. And music is incredibly therapeutic. Even the lyrics alone were things taken from poetry, it was things taken from literature, and a lot of it was very, very deep. Much deeper than, say, the chart-topping hits that were kind of going around our school at the time. So when we had what a lot of the alternative kids listened to versus what the normies listened to, it resulted in us digging deeper, and it also resulted in us being a lot more dramatic, but it expanded our vocabulary, it expanded our kind of view of the world, and it's the reason I feel like we kind of grew more. So when it's presented as a way of like, oh, it's a phase, for example, oh, I grew out of that, it's kind of funny to me because we had probably grown a lot faster than a lot of our own peers, because it had us venturing out into spaces with older people quite a lot. And we had fake IDs and we would go into clubs and we would congregate with these people. And we were going into the city, which had with it its own interesting culture. And you go home, your weekend's over, and then you go back to your suburban high school on Monday and you're looking around, you thinking, wow, you guys are really missing out. Which is a little bit of an egotistical way to kind of look at things when you're younger, but we really did feel that way. When we were younger, we kind of felt like we discovered this amazing new thing, and at least I felt bad for the other kids in my school. I'm like, wow, how can you go through life and just not know, not experience this? So sometimes I would make friends with the normie kids, and I'd be like, hey, you want to go out to a golf club? And I would take them to the Bat Cave. I would take them to Detour. I would take them to all these different places, and they would have a blast. And I liked that crossover. I liked the fact that just different groups could congregate together and experience each other's worlds. That to me was amazing. But I'm kind of straying from the point a little bit, but I want to kind of paint a picture for you of how deep the subculture runs for so many of us, and how bad a situation can be that you can forget all that. But I don't know if I said this previously, but it happens so gradually. It really does. It's a gradual thing, and then by the time, say 4 years for me, 4 years past, you're suddenly looking down at your clothes saying, why the hell am I wearing gray? where is all of my music? And suddenly you realize that you don't remember a damn thing, that you somehow, all of these memories, all of these passions, all of these things, somehow they bled out of you. And you spend a good deal of time trying to get that back. And it is a process coming back from that. And there's so many reasons too. So I had to get a pillow for the chair. So there are so many different reasons that a person can, for example, forget or kind of have their normie phase. So as much as we have this negative relationship with the word phase, it's so negative that it's okay for us somehow, or at least for me, to kind of rationalize saying, well, I don't really like hearing the word phase used in correlation with myself and the subculture, but to say that I had a normie phase, it's negative enough to where it's applicable. So some of the reasons that these kinds of things would happen would be, for example, you have a family who's very disapproving of your lifestyle, your look, and they make life very difficult for you. And you kind of just push those kinds of things aside. And for those people, I think they more may look normal on the outside, but they're just kind of biding their time and waiting till the age of 18 before they can go out and be themselves. But the other reasons I think have a huge impact are, for example, relationships, which that's something that happened to me, which was the reason that I did, but I'll get into that later. Another reason is maybe you're a new parent. You're a new parent now, and suddenly your whole life and your whole world is this child, and that's not necessarily a negative thing. But you can lose yourself in the sense that suddenly your old Spotify playlist now contains things like The Wiggles or Baby Shark and things, and that's what your world is really encompassed by. And 2 years pass, suddenly your kid's a toddler now, and you realize that your boots have been collecting dust in the closet, and you haven't heard a decent goth track in forever, and you're like, wait a minute, where the hell did all these leggings come from? And it happens that quick. But people always somehow find their way back, and some easier than others, and others it's a bit of a process, and particularly if you fell out by way of something traumatic. And some people's transition back into themselves when they find themselves again, some's easier, some is a little bit harder depending upon what made you fall out of it in the first place. And if it's by way of, say, trauma, say, accident, illness, relationship, then it's going to be a little bit harder to kind of come back. But when you do, there's something very affirming, reassuring, comforting. It's like finding your home again when you do. And it's almost mind-blowing because the intensity you feel when you return, it's almost like, how did I forget this? How did I forget that this was one of my favorite CDs that I listened to incessantly? How did I forget that I had the most vast collection of tights than anyone I've ever known? How did I forget that I used to love to just go into the city, wander around, and troll the music stores and look around through all of the used CDs, or go into trash and vaudeville and like check the sale racks? You just remember all of the little things about yourself that you completely forgot. Like, it's startling how much of your life that you can actually forget. And for me, my reason was by way of a relationship. And I don't want this to really be a negative video. I want this to be more helpful because I want it to kind of serve as a way to remind you that goths do have a normie phase. As suck as it can be, it's a very normal thing to happen. Goths can kind of fall out and just lose themselves because they become so immersed in something else that they just, it supersedes everything else and takes over their entire existence. But you do find your way back. So I was in a relationship to where I had the very fact that I was always, for the longest time, at a very young age, I was very, very sure of who I was. And I was happy with who I was, and I had these passions, and I stuck with it. And I was very much involved in the subculture, but I kind of had that presented to me in the sense that it was negative. And the other person didn't like those sort of facts or attributes both physical as well as the things that I was interested in. And music has always been such a huge part of my life, always. And it's been my medicine for many, many years. And when you're going through a trauma and you have something that is essentially healing for you, something that has helped you and kind of given you some sort of solace within the chaos taken from you, it just makes it that much worse. And it didn't happen fast. It happened very gradually. And when you have it presented to you that the very thing that you are, all the things that make you who you are, the things that you love, your passions, all of those things are lack of evolution, your inability to sort of grow as an individual, you kind of start to believe it. And it just becomes easier for you to just stop doing the things that make you who you are. Because by stopping, life gets a little bit more peaceful, but it really doesn't. It doesn't get any more peaceful. It gets a little bit more quiet, but there's no peace. So that being said, it is gradual, and you don't realize that you're even doing it. You don't realize suddenly you're not listening to this one song anymore. And then you're not listening to this one band anymore. And then you're not listening to this one genre anymore. Suddenly all your black clothes are gone. And that's how it happened. But for me, I really didn't know how bad it had gotten and how lost I truly was until that relationship had ended. Because when a relationship ends, particularly when it's a long-term relationship that ends, you don't realize how much of your lives have kind of melded together in a lot of ways. And when that happens, you have to learn to live like an individual. And when you do, it's probably helpful if you have some concept of who the hell you are. Because if you don't, that process is so much harder. Once I got into a new relationship with somebody who allows me to flourish and really helped pull me out of myself and force me to remember who I am. I don't want to say that you need someone else to do that for you, that you're not completely capable of doing that on your own, because you are. You are 100% capable. I did a lot of that on my own, but if I didn't have someone pushing me and forcing me to remember, and I think that it would have been a lot longer and a lot harder for me. So that's why I say whatever phase of the relationship you're in right now, if it's a relationship you're in, you might be a little bit unsure, give yourself a once over. Check and see where you are now versus where you were in the beginning and ask yourself why you're there. Nothing's changed, you're good as gold. However, if you find yourself saying, you know what, yeah, sometimes I am made fun of because of these things, because sometimes you find yourself, you know who you are, the other person, they may have moved on to the very next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And just because you know who you are and you've not changed, that's not a bad thing. Also, it is important that you know that it is such a common thing to lose sight of who you are sometimes. And the very thing that was able to basically close the book on the final chapter that was just a very bad period of my life and help me move forward in really remembering who I am is my YouTube channel. Because here I am and I get to share all of my stories. I get to tell you everything from the very beginning. And there is nothing more reaffirming than hitting rewind, going right back to the beginning and telling your story. Because for a lot of it, getting to say it out loud, it was almost like reliving it. You want to talk reaffirming? That is a crash course in getting back on track and remembering who you are. So tell your story. If you are also kind of like, if you're in that period and you're like, oh, I'm just trying to find my way back. I went through this hard time, but you know what? I'm like slowly, I'm kind of like pulling myself out of this hole. And tell your story. Tell your story to anybody who will listen, because I'm telling you right now, there is nothing more reaffirming than hearing yourself recount the tale and just kind of really digging in the depths of your memory and pulling out things that you didn't even know that you remembered. Back from getting bagels after a club night. And there was this, every club I went to, I had a specific snack that I would get afterward. When we went to the bank, we'd go to the bank, we would go right next door. I think it was called the Hot and Crusty, or just Hot Bagels. I forget what it was called. I would get a bagel with cream cheese, sesame bagel with cream cheese, and then I would get a Nantucket nectar drink. And then when I went to Detour on Long Island, I would get a Nestle Crunch, and I would get an orange soda. Don't knock it. And then when I went to the Bat Cave, we would just go in the corner and we would get pizza, because that place was open late. So we would get pizza on the corner from the Bat Cave, and other random Long Island clubs, because our diners were 24 hours. We would just go to diners and just like get a pile of fries and basically leave ourselves in a potato coma. It's things like that, little things. It's like the dumb little things that you didn't realize that you had forgotten, that really bring you back. It's like going to CVS or Walgreens or Rite Aid during Halloween, because that's when you can get your black lipstick, because it's just harder to get elsewhere. Now we have so many choices, but it's one of those things. And really, I cannot recommend enough just pulling those thoughts out of the depths of yourself. The stupidest, most minute little details are the most important ones, because when you pull those little ones out, there are bigger ones attached to it, and they really help you remember who you are, and just, you can kind of look fondly on these things with a smile. And it's sad. It's sad that we can forget so easily. It's sad that we can forget the very things that made us who we are. It's sad that we can forget the things that made us so happy and saved us. Like I said, for me, when I was a kid and I was younger, I did not come from the most stable home. And Goth to me was that home. And I don't know where I would be had it not been for the subculture. Because as I said, music is medicine, music is healing, and just being involved in that it was exactly what I needed. It's something that never left me. It's something that never will leave me. Never again. So I hope that this video has been helpful. And if you find yourself in a situation where you are slowly trying to make your way back and you feel even an ounce of shame, don't. It happens to so many people. There are so many of us out there. Till next time.